comes for you, Brent. Welcome to Fantasy Smack Talk. I'm Dustin, and this is the Week 1 Waiver Wire Show. Just a few days away at this point. We're all getting excited. Before we get into it, though, if you got any questions, post them in our forums. And we're very active in there. We have an army of experts that are in there, answering the questions for you. So if you got any lineup questions, all the Brent, myself, and Mike are also in there. So if you got any lineup questions, go ahead, get them in there, and we'll go ahead and try to answer them as quick as we can. Let's talk about the waiver wire. So the drafts are pretty much over at this point. You might have one or two left with just a couple of days before the season. So let's take a look at the waiver wire and see who's out there. First guy I want to talk about is Fred Jackson. I know he's not the most exciting guy at this point in his career, but you still can't ignore what he's done and what he did last year, only on 75% of leagues. I really don't see his role changing that much. It's still going to be a two-headed monster out there. He's still going to get a lot of goal line carries for them. So I still think you got to own Fred Jackson. I understand him slipping later and later in the drafts, but not going undrafted. He needs to be owned in more leagues. Carlos Hyde, one of the best handcuffs out there, only owned in 70% of leagues. If you own Gore, go get Hyde. It's as simple as that. You need to have him on your team because he's a very high upside handcuff. Jeremy Hill's another guy I wanted to talk about. One thing I get really annoyed with this time of year is, oh, it's going to be a committee. It's going to be a committee. You look at the Bengals situation, yes, of course it's going to be a committee. I mean, the reports were Bernard was going to get 300 touches. I never really believed that. So Hill is going to factor in. He's going to be the BGE role from last year, in my opinion. And I think Hill will have value even without a Bernard injury. But if Bernard goes down, Hill could be huge. So I really do like Hill as a guy to stash on your bench and just see what happens because he's going to get some touches. Noshawn Moreno is another guy, only owned in 35% of leagues. I think he should be owned in all leagues at this point. Yes, it's going to be a committee with Lamar Miller. They're going to split carries. Miller, I think, definitely has... I see this situation a lot like potentially like out in Buffalo as far as the split goes. I think Lamar Miller plays more the CJ Spiller type role, and I do think Moreno ends up being the kind of the more featured back out there for the Dolphins. I just think he had such a great year last year. He's looked better in the preseason, and I still think Lamar Miller's more the change of pace back than the other way around. And I gotta talk about Danny Woodhead here for a little bit. Only owned in 60% of leagues. I get it. He's probably been underrated his entire life as far as how good he actually is at football, but I'm going to compare him to Darren Sproles. Woodhead had over 1,000 total yards last year, and he had 8 total touchdowns. Sproles didn't even have nearly as good of those numbers. Sproles moves into a worse situation going to the Eagles and having to compete with McCoy, and Sproles is owned in more leagues than Woodhead. I just don't understand that, and you might say, oh, the touchdowns were fluky. Well, I think he had 7 total touchdowns the year before in New England with less touches. The guy just finds a way to get into the end zone. He's a good football player, and he needs to be owned in more leagues. I know he's not the most exciting, but pick him up. Ahmad Bradshaw, I think, is a guy to add in deeper leagues. Not totally sold that Trent Richardson's going to end up winning that job, and if Bradshaw's healthy, they did bring him over a couple years ago to be their running back, kind of for the future, the next few years. If he's healthy, I think he wins that job. Devontae Freeman's another guy. I think that, high upside handcuff. He's only owned in 45% of leagues right now. Not getting quite as much love as Hyde because there's all the reports about Freeman being third on the depth charts behind Rodgers, but that's not really the case. If Steven Jackson gets hurt, Freeman's going to move to the Steven Jackson role, and Rodgers' role doesn't change. So Freeman should definitely be owned in more leagues at this point. Got a couple receivers for you. Jordan Matthews I wanted to talk about, only on 35% of leagues. I think he's worthy of an ad, in deeper leagues. As far as rookie receivers go, I think he's in a pretty good situation with the Eagles. Macklin's in front of him, but I definitely think Matthews is going to be out on the field a good bit. And I think he could be kind of like a Cobb type player for them as far as, maybe giving him the ball in some end arounds and just giving him, maybe some wide receiver screens just to get the ball in this kid's hands because he is a dynamic player. I do like his upside on that offense. Andrew Hawkins is another guy I think that's worth owning in deeper leagues, only on about 25% of leagues right now. And I don't think he's just a PPR guy. I mean, obviously I think he gets a boost in PPR leagues, but I think they're going to be looking for Hawkins to get a decent amount of targets for that offense. Defense, they got to worry about Miles Austin who you don't really have to worry about. And then Cameron. So I feel like Cameron, you know, is their main threat. I feel defense is going to really hone in on him, and I think Hawkins is going to be kind of forgotten about a little bit. And I do like his upside and not just PPRs. And Geno Smith is a quarterback I want to talk about. I think he's definitely worthy of a pick in deeper leagues or a pickup in deeper leagues. Here's the thing. Coming into the preseason, having Vic there with a little bit of that uncertainty as far as how the Jets were going to handle that situation, yes, you had to have Geno way down your draft boards, but now they're putting their confidence in Geno. They're definitely saying, you know, he's their quarterback of the future. They're going with him, and he didn't have that bad of a year last year. You add Chris Johnson to that offense. You add Eric Decker to that offense. They're not the laughing stock anymore that they once were. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, he's going to be a top 10 quarterback, but with what he can do with his legs, it's very possible he could flirt with being a top 15 quarterback. So, you know, top 15 quarterback shouldn't be owned in only 10% of leagues. So I think he definitely needs to be, you know, picked up in more leagues at this point. And then one pickup and play defense for you. You know, if you got a decent defense, but you're not really liking their matchup week 1, you might want to take a look at Pittsburgh. Playing at home against Cleveland, you gotta love that with how bad Cleveland looked this preseason. You know, I think Pittsburgh definitely will, you know, probably get some sacks, maybe force a couple turnovers. So I like them as a pickup and play defense. So this is just a portion of the list. If you want to see the full list, get onto the website, get in the forums if you've got any questions. Brent and I'll be back, you know, later in the week with our Fantasy Fix show, and it's that time of year. You gotta love it.